Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive piece of breaking news that's literally sending shockwaves across the globe. We are going to look at the ripple effect of this potential 60-day US-Iran ceasefire deal. As you'll see, we're going to trace how this developing story moves from the global geopolitical epicenter right down to a very familiar place for all of us, your local gas pump. Okay, let's dive into this and look at our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the 60-day ceasefire deal. Then we'll look at unlocking the straits, dive into the internal pressures inside Iran, examine the Abraham Accords shift, and finally look at the real-world impact on your wallet. So, starting us off, Section 1, the 60-day ceasefire deal. This really serves as the epicenter of our whole ripple effect narrative. To really grasp what's happening, we have to accurately define what's actually on the table right now. Basically, negotiators have reached what's called a 60-day Memorandum of Understanding, or an MOU. Now, this is an agreement to essentially extend the current ceasefire and formally launch negotiations on the budget and Iran's nuclear program. It's currently just awaiting President Trump's final approval. But here is the thing. While sources are noting this is the most significant breakthrough since the war started, we have to remember this is just an extension of a ceasefire that is already about 55 days old. It's an MOU. It is not a finalized signed treaty. And that brings us to a quote that perfectly captures the current vibe from a senior administration official. They said, "No deal until there is a deal." I mean, that's a stark reminder, right? While they might be hashing out the language regarding nuclear stockpiles and waterways, the U.S. is maintaining a very strict zero-tolerance policy for nuclear weapons. The negotiations on those stringent demands are still strictly ongoing, so nothing is set in stone until the ink is completely dry. Moving on to Section 2, unlocking the street. We're taking a step from the negotiation table to the actual physical bodies of water impacted by all this. Now, you might be wondering, why focus so heavily on the Strait of Hormuz? Like, why is this one specific waterway such a massive sticking point in these negotiations? And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. The major logistical hurdle right now is that a U.S. blockade is firmly in place. This has created a massive, real-life backlog of ships just sitting there, waiting to get through the strait. Because of this blockade, Iran is entirely unable to move commerce out of its ports. It has completely halted their maritime trade, which has created an absolutely crushing economic situation for them. At the end of the day, it all comes down to money and resources being completely bottlenecked at this strait. But, we also have to remember that this environment is still incredibly volatile. The current ceasefire, it's shaky, to say the least. Just recently, for example, Iran actually tried to hit a U.S. base in Kuwait. Thankfully, the missile was intercepted, but despite all the optimism around these negotiations, the reality on the ground and on the water is keeping the entire region absolutely on edge. Okay, Section 3, inside Iran. Internal pressures. Let's look really closely at the internal dynamics that are driving the Iranian government's position right now. We hear this narrative a lot, that Iran somehow has the upper hand in these situations. But if you compare their external military capabilities with their internal vulnerabilities, well, it paints a very different picture. Externally, their military is severely limited. They effectively have no air force to speak of, relying mostly on small drones. But internally, the vulnerabilities are severe. The country's economy is getting crushed, citizens are reportedly feeling like prisoners, and they're deeply upset with their government, all against this really grim backdrop of public hangings. A fascinating little detail that really highlights this internal pressure involves the internet. Recently, internet access in Iran was actually restored. Now, let's be clear, this wasn't some olive branch to give citizens more freedom. It was turned back on out of pure desperation to facilitate online commerce, because, as we talked about, their physical ports are blocked. But in doing so, it inadvertently gave the outside world a direct window into the intense internal pressure the Iranian government is facing. We literally saw citizens actively speaking out against their own leadership. Section 4, the Abraham Accords shift. Let's take a 30,000-foot view here and zoom out to the broader Middle Eastern geopolitical chessboard. Let's move to and see how this builds into a much larger strategy. According to the reporting, President Trump is adding layered demands here. Step 1, obviously, is securing the immediate deal on the nuclear stockpile and enriched uranium. But Step 2 is a much broader demand, pushing for Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states to officially join the Abraham Accords. If that works, step 3 is a fundamental shift in the entire balance of power across the Middle East. This is being framed not just as legacy building for an election cycle, but as a long-term international security move for our kids and future generations. Which brings us to our final ripple, Section 5, impact on your wallet. We've talked high-level geopolitics, but how does a deal thousands of miles away actually affect your morning commute and your wallet? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the current domestic inflation rate, hovering right around 3.2 to 3.3%. This represents the very real economic pressure that consumers are feeling right here at home. Everything from our personal balance sheets to our daily energy costs is totally tied into this massive global economic web. So, if this 60-day pause actually gets money and resources flowing through the Strait of Hormuz again, it could loosen up global oil supplies pretty dramatically. And there are a couple of key factors that could bring oil prices down fast. First, the UAE has stepped out of OPEC and OPEC+, which means they could potentially flood the market with oil. Second, U.S. Gulf Coast ports are reportedly ready to process crude coming straight out of Venezuela. Getting that bottleneck at the strait resolved could have an immediate, massive impact on global oil supplies. And honestly, the timing of this is absolutely crucial. As we head into the summer months, oil demand naturally spikes, which historically drives prices way up. The administration is doing a real tightrope walk right now, trying to balance our domestic economic prosperity with establishing global peace. It's a textbook negotiation act meant to ease the economic warfare on the street while still holding incredibly firm on security. So we've seen how this entire situation cascades, right? From high-level nuclear demands to choked shipping lanes straight down to the price you pay at the pump. But it leaves us with one massive, lingering question to ponder. Will a temporary 60-day pause be enough time to finalize a deal that permanently shifts the global balance of power and stabilizes our economy? That is the big question that will definitely define the coming months. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep your eyes on the street.